Good evening, everyone. My name is Rachel Cass, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this evening's event with David Kennedy, author of the new book, Don't Shoot, One Man, a Street Fellowship, and the End of Violence in Inner City America. Tonight's event is just one of many author talks that Harvard Bookstore is hosting this fall. We still have tickets left for Friday evening's talk with Jeffrey Sachs. He's an expert on economic and environmental policy and director of the Earth Institute, and his new book is The Price of Civilization. He'll be speaking at 6 p.m. at the Brattle Theater on Friday evening. We also still have tickets on sale for later in the fall for events with newsmen Jim Lehrer and Tom Brokaw, as well as literary greats Joan Didion and Umberto Eco, among other events. So for more information about our full event series, you can visit us online at harvard.com/events, where our fall event schedule is continually being updated. I just want to note that after the talk this evening, we will have time for questions from the audience. As this evening's event is being recorded, I would ask that if you have a question, you just wait for the audience mic to come to you before you ask it. Looks like that over there. And I also want to take this moment to remind you to please turn off or silence your cell phone or other electronic devices. It's now my pleasure to introduce this evening's speaker, David Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy is a professor of criminal justice at John Jay College, as well as director of the Center for Crime Prevention and Control. A self-taught criminologist, he helped engineer the Boston Miracle in the 1990s by bringing together law enforcement, community leaders, and drug traders to cut down on street violence in Boston neighborhoods. His work has been adapted for cities across the country and has earned him numerous awards, including 2 Innovations in American Government Awards from the Kennedy School here at Harvard. His new book, Don't Shoot, is a memoir of his work developing and implementing his program by understanding and describing street violence on a theoretical level. A recent online review for the New Republic notes, what is brilliant about Kennedy's work is its specificity, its insistence that street violence has its own special contours and patterns that can be understood and manipulated. As I said, after the talk, we will have time for questions, followed by a signing here at the front. As always, I'd like to thank anyone who purchases a book here this evening. By doing so, you're supporting both the local independent bookstore as well as this author series. So now please join me in welcoming David Kennedy.
Thanks, Rachel. Good evening. I don't think this is just one in a series of many book events, just for the record. Umberto Eco and Joan Didion. I like this book stuff, I really do. So I was telling Rachel earlier that, so this is an author's comment rather than a policy guy's comment. I haunted this bookstore through much of my youth and middle years. So I'll tell the story a little bit, but I meant to be a writer, and it was my ambition to be John McPhee, basically. I wanted to be a literary nonfiction writer. And I started out in the early 80s, literally by going down to out-of-town news and buying a bunch of writers' magazines and looking at how you become a freelance writer. Writers' magazines are like bicycle magazines or cooking magazines. They tell you the same thing over and over and over and over again in every issue, and then they have to figure out some way to make you think it's different. And what they say in writers' magazines is, write the editor a query letter, and if he says yes, go write an article. Everything else is secondary. So I started doing that. And while I was doing that, I got a job at the Kennedy School writing teaching materials for the faculty there. And I did that for the next 15 years in various ways. And I lived on Dudley Street, and our case writing shop offices were on Dunster Street when I got started, and then moved over to the main JFK building. I lived in North Cambridge for years. And I was probably in this bookstore 2 or 3 times a week the entire time, mostly in the bottom, which at least used to be the used books. So please don't wait for Don't Shoot to go downstairs, get it upstairs. But it's really kind of personally fabulous to be standing here doing this. And I was also telling Rachel that our first book event was the end of last month in Cambridge, and I did it with John Seabrook, who actually is a New Yorker writer, and who did a really wonderful New Yorker piece about this stuff about 2.5 years ago. And John started the conversation by saying, so I was fascinated when I got into this to discover that David meant to be a writer, and now after about 30 years, he's finally written a literary nonfiction book. Writers will do anything to procrastinate, including having an entirely different substantive career, which is what I'm actually here to talk about. So, let's talk about what I've spent those 30 years obsessing about. So, we're a couple of weeks beyond the annual fall release of the FBI crime numbers. And I had a little bet with myself, and I wrote the editorial copy for that before the FBI numbers came out. And I was exactly right, as it turned out. So, news was good, despite the recession and everything else that people thought were going to drive the numbers higher. Once again, in 2010, we had another decline in violent crime. A homicide rate for the country came down another 4 and a bit percent. That is another pearl in a string of very good national years. The violent crime rate is down to 1960s levels in many parts of the country. And everybody's very pleased. And that was the end of the discussion, because all the news is good. The numbers are down, continues to be down. Everybody's very pleased. And that is both true and dramatically, tragically wrong, because those are the national numbers, and they're true, but they miss the other side of the picture. So my colleague, John Clofus, who teaches at the Rochester Institute of Technology, likes to say, nobody lives in the country. We live in neighborhoods, we live on our blocks, we live on our streets. And some of our neighborhoods and blocks and streets are burning. So the national homicide rate during the crack epidemic, which is its modern peak, hit about 10 per 100,000. So this is how criminologists and the FBI annotate this stuff. 10 dead every year per 100,000 population. It's now down to about 4 per 100,000, which is part of everybody's national self-satisfaction on all this. Anybody know what the homicide rate for black men is in the United States? It is over 100 per 100,000 today. And that's, again, the national rate, because this stuff is not evenly distributed nationally, socially, geographically. And again, my friend John Clofus has done the analysis in a string of Rochester neighborhoods called the Crescent. So many of our cities, and not just big cities anymore, have these neighborhoods. These are historically troubled, almost entirely African-American neighborhoods. The stuff I'm talking about doesn't go on in white neighborhoods, and nationally it almost doesn't go on in Hispanic neighborhoods. This is a singular black American problem. And in this crescent of troubled neighborhoods, the homicide rate for 18 and 19-year-old black men is 520 per 100,000 every year. Which means, if you just do the long division, that it means that more than 1 in 100 young black men are killed almost entirely by gunshot every year. And my friend Lori Neumeier is here. Lori does work with the kids from these neighborhoods who've gotten caught up in the system in Boston. And she and I and everybody who works on these issues is beside ourselves with the fact that this goes on in plain sight. It gets almost no attention. It acquires no resources. I was in a working meeting with some of our black community partners not that long ago at John Jay, and we went off track and started talking about why nobody cares about this stuff. and the question was from a black man in the room.